day. Oh wow, 11 o'clock alarm just goes off. Uh, I ran across a good video here that I figured I would kind of try to walk people through what I noticed everyone is having a dichotomy with. They're whether you believe in God or not, there's always the misconception behind the philosophical question of prove God, prove Christianity, or disprove God, disprove Christianity. So it goes both ways. So first of all, I need to point out about this video. I haven't watched it yet. I want to watch it and kind of give my thoughts on it as we're watching it because I feel like both sides of the spectrum here, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, don't necessarily understand the science behind answering these philosophical questions, which is exactly why it is a philosophical question. Okay, so when you're asking these philosophical questions of does God exist or not, you're not necessarily really going to know because it's mostly just a guess for either one side or the other. So, before I start reacting to this video, I want to establish something really important about the question we're actually debating. Does God exist or doesn't God exist? So that's basically what this video is about. And in fact, I like to do a lot of uh that's kind of my main thing I've always been into is debating these types of philosophical questions in more ways than one. Anything about the nature of existence and reality. I've always been interested because I've always been on the side of believing, God must exist. So I've always gotten better at, finding ways to prove my point and find solutions behind, what I believe. So philosophically, we're dealing with the question where our available information may not be sufficient to establish either answer with absolute certainty. That creates the paradox I want everyone to keep in mind throughout this debate. Reality already contains the answer, but we may not have access to enough of reality to know that answer yet. It's like asking whether a coin landed heads or tails before you've been allowed to see the coin. There is an answer, you just don't necessarily have enough information to know it. And that's where I think a lot of these debates go wrong. We start demanding def- def- uh, definitive answers to questions that humanity may not currently possess enough information to definitely answer. So while I'm reacting to Joe's arguments, I'm going to keep coming back to one question. Does his argument actually establish what is true? Or is he drawing a conclusion from information we simply don't have yet? Because saying, I don't know, is completely different from saying, therefore, it doesn't exist. And that is the philosophical problem I want to explore tonight. Okay, I have another opening statement I wanted to present. Before we even debate whether Christianity is mythology, I think there's a paradox hiding inside this entire argument. Joe Rogan is basically asking us to answer a question that humanity may not actually be capable of answering yet. Think about it like a coin. One side says God exists, the other side says God doesn't exist. Now imagine somebody throws that coin into the air, and while it's still spinning, says, "Okay, tell me which side it landed on." Well, it hasn't landed for us yet. You can believe it's heads, you can believe it's tails, you can build arguments for either side, but you cannot honestly say you've observed the final result. And here's the paradox: reality already has an answer. Either God exists or God doesn't. The truth isn't waiting for us to vote on it. We are waiting for reality to reveal enough information for us to know it. And proving the God doesn't exist side creates an even bigger problem. How could you conclusively prove that no God exists anywhere beyond everything humanity has ever observed? So before we argue about Christianity, mythology, atheism, or religion, I want everyone watching to think about this. Are we actually debating the answer? Or are we debating what we think the answer will be before we've seen the coin land? Because if you already know the answer with absolute certainty, then I have one question for you. How did you get access to all of reality's information? And that is where I want to start this debate. So I already posted a follow-up comment, basically a little bit like what I was just presenting right before I started this. And I said this: here's the problem with saying you know whether God exists or doesn't exist. Imagine the answer is like a coin tossed into the air. One side says God exists, the other says God doesn't exist. Until reality actually reveals which side is true, we're arguing about a coin we haven't personally seen land. But here's where it gets weird. If God doesn't exist, that side of the coin may never produce a moment where reality announces, "Yup, confirmed, no God exists anywhere, in any form, beyond everything we can observe." There might always be something beyond what we currently know if God doesn't exist. However, there is at least a conceivable way the question could eventually be settled. God could reveal himself in a way that leaves no reasonable doubt. Basically, self-evident if you see it with your own eyes. So, like, my theory, the great return of God, which is also the great day of judgment. Everyone's going to most likely see him on the great day of judgment. Of course, that's my theory. But to me, that seems to make the most sense. He knows everything. He's probably going to judge everybody based on what they did or didn't do. So my theory, we'll probably all see him at least on the great day of judgment, which is basically the beginning of the afterlife. Right when you begin the afterlife, everybody is judged according to their works. Like, basically kind of like trial. When everyone is going to be basically convicted of any sort of crime that they may have committed. If he finds it to be, a violation or punishable, a crime against humanity, I feel like on the great day of judgment, he's going to punish anybody committing crimes against humanity. So when you do something you shouldn't do. So there's probably going to be a lot of leniency behind it. So as long as you haven't done nothing very wrong or bad, he's probably not going to charge you as a crime. But I believe it's kind of like our court system. Once you've kind of crossed the line and you've done something bad enough, like in my own opinion, it's going to be like crossing the line of, maybe you murdered somebody in cold blood for basically no reason. It's going to be things like that. So anything that's highly, highly, highly punishable, that humanity is, kind of against. But I don't think it has any. I don't think it's gonna have anything to do with what we say is good or bad. It's gonna be solely what he decides. Hey, you shouldn't have done that. So I think there's gonna be a lot of leniency. Like the gay people, they're always kind of freaking out that they're gonna get in trouble. I think there's gonna be a lot of leniency on that. I don't think anyone's gonna get in serious trouble for that. Uh, I don't think actually they're gonna get in trouble for that at all. It all comes down to if anybody is doing things that other people don't want them to do, and if it is directly forcing them to do it. So if you're basically forcing other people to do things they don't want to do, like for example, kidnapping, human trafficking, things like that. Like that's a truly, heartless crime. It's all depending, like, is it completely heartless? Did you force somebody to do it? See, that's the biggest thing. Forcing people to do things they don't want to do. I think that's going to be one of the number one things that people are going to get in trouble for, because I don't think anybody's going to be allowed to force people to do things they don't want to do. So I think that's going to be like 99% of all the convictions, is when you have done something somebody else didn't want you to do. And if it's, basically destructive. So let me continue what I wrote here. Where were we? We were right here, right? Yep, confirmed. No God exists anywhere. Okay. If God doesn't exist, that side of the coin may never produce a moment where reality announces, yep, confirmed. No God exists anywhere in any form beyond everything we can observe. There might always be something beyond what we currently know. If God doesn't exist, however, there is at least a conceivable way the question could eventually be settled. God could reveal himself in a way that leaves no reasonable doubt. So in reality, the coin has already landed. There is already a true answer. We just might not have access to it yet. Reality itself contains the answer, whether humanity knows it or not. And that leads to the part I find fascinating. If somebody claims to know with absolute certainty what exists or doesn't exist across all of reality, wouldn't they need knowledge of all of reality to actually prove it? At that point, congratulations, you're starting to sound suspiciously close to the all-knowing being you're trying to prove doesn't exist. So let's watch this video.
Christianity, at the end of the day, with no proof, everything is mythology. Do you have a box of evidence that you can pull out and we can examine all the different pieces? Because if you don't, then it's a myth.
For years, Joe Rogan demanded.
So he's acting like it's an answer that is never going to be answered. He's basically coming off to be impatient. We're all wondering the same question of, does God exist? Does God not exist? But he, to me, is coming off like he's entitled to know that answer. But I think God is looking down at everybody in a sense of not anybody is entitled to know that answer right away, demanding, tell me the answer. What's the coin going to land on? So he's basically still has the coin flipping through the air because it's one of the biggest events that's ever going to occur throughout all of existence, which is kind of like the beginning or the boot up of all reality. So he's demanding, it's like he's demanding that the boot up phase be overrided. He's like, well, let's just start this. Let's just finish it. Let's just know. Why doesn't he just let us know? And this is why I think we're going through this, is because God was waiting for someone like me to actually put it into a perspective of, well, you're demanding an answer to what is known as basically a paradox. You can't necessarily get those answers. Some answers you're never going to get right away. And I think that's one of those things that God is going to experience and knew that he was going to experience so much throughout the eternities of the eternities, where he's going to always have people demanding answers that, yeah, he may hold the answer to those questions, but he's not going to reveal every single answer you have a question to. Okay? So I think this is all boils down to, don't try to force people to do things they do not want to do. All right, so if God doesn't want to tell you the future, because the future is basically like a paradox. Everyone's always demanding, tell me what's going to happen 10 billion years into the future. And that might not be one of those sorts of questions he likes to answer, because the coin is still flipping through the air. He doesn't want to spoil it and just, oh, well, there's the answer. I know that it's going to land that way. I know it's going to land that way. I know. Just because he holds the answers to everything doesn't mean you can just sit there and demand in front of his face, tell me the answer. Tell me the answer. So we're dealing with this childlike behavior of people wanting answers, demanding answers. It's like he is basically demanding answers. All right, well, Joe Rogan, join the club. We all want to know these answers. How about you, if that's your question of, do you have evidence to prove God exists laying out in a box? Show it to me. Okay, well, if you want those sorts of answers, don't just go demanding it from other people if you're not going to go partake in doing some of the research. Because apparently this is something we're all waiting for, all right? You're not the only person waiting for this answer. And you're actually kind of lucky that I'm here to reveal the paradox, because it's almost like I am actually able to give you the answer you've been looking for, but you're not. It's like you're not even looking. You're waiting for everything to be handed down to you on a platter, and yet here I am. I'm also very, interested in knowing these answers, but I'm the one doing the actual work. So I'm sitting here doing all the actual work to get these answers, figure out these answers, and finding out, like, is it even possible to answer this question? How do we answer this question? How do we get this answer? And I myself was a little bit like Joe Rogan. I'm not knocking him. I get it. Everyone's very curious. We want to know these things. But you're in the same boat as everybody. We're all waiting to see the great revelation. And it just so happens I am basically the man that was able to finally solve the paradox and put it into context of how demanding these sorts of answers either way, whether I demand an answer from you of, well, prove God doesn't exist, well, that's kind of absurd. That's kind of asking too much without enough information. I know that you don't have that information, so it's kind of unfair for me to sit there and demand to you, well, prove God doesn't exist. Just like it's unfair for him to demand, well, prove God exists. It goes both ways because we're both waiting to see if which way the coin is gonna land. So the paradox is, it's like the coin is either never gonna land, or if we wait long enough, the coin is gonna land. So let's continue. Now, I think you guys kind of understand the problem here is demanding answers to things before you've basically received enough information. You're basically not being patient. So like Joe Rogan, you're lucky I actually basically have the answer to your question. He's demanding, does God exist? And I basically have a theoretical answer, which is most likely the answer. So Joe Rogan, before we even kick this video off, this is basically directed to you. You're demanding to know, does God exist? And I'm trying to get the word out there that it's basically like I've finally answered the question, because I must be right. So whether anybody is able to answer the question of, does God exist or does God not exist, one side of the coin must be the ultimate solution, must be the ultimate answer. So the way that I've tackled looking at this paradox, it's almost like I've basically solved the problem. So it's just a matter of if you actually understand the paradox. So to me, a paradox is something that you can't really actually explain. So after I've broken down the paradox in so many different ways, it's basically like I have the answer that God must exist. So my answer is, theoretically, it's 100% God must exist or 100% that God must not exist. So one answer is basically completely foolish. So the great revelation is reality itself holds the answer. So I couldn't possibly really say I hold the answer. I could only say, I guess this must be the answer. So my response to Joe Rogan is, well, I'm guessing that the answer must be God exists, because I have provided the solutions as to why it must be God exist. So one other thing I wanted to straighten out for Joe Rogan is, one side of the coin if God doesn't exist, it's like the coin is never going to land. So we have two options. Either we're going to find out at some point, and then the coin lands on heads. Oh, we all see God exists. Well, if the coin ever lands like that, everyone's going to know, oh my gosh, God must exist. So the question is basically better looked at like, will the coin ever land? So my hypothesis, my theory is it's almost like the coin must be going to land. Now, the other side of the coin dictates that it's like the coin is never going to land. So it's either A or B. At some point, the coin is going to land, or B, it's like the coin's never going to land, and then it's like no one's ever going to know the answer anyway. So it's either A or B. We're either going to see that the coin lands, or no one's ever going to know anyway God doesn't exist. So one way or the other, you're never going to know God doesn't exist. Either way. So either way, it's like you're never going to really see the one side of the coin, which is going to be God doesn't exist. So that's why I conclude the answer must be God must exist, that the coin must land, must be going to land, and it is going to basically land. That's all I'm saying. So let's just go back to what Joe is saying here. So I hope everyone understands now. He's basically trying to have everybody answer a question before the coin has landed. It's like flipping a coin in the air and then saying, do you know the answer? And then the coin hasn't even landed. Is it heads or tails? So it's kind of like being, what's the word? It's like being arrogant. To me, he's being arrogant with it, which is the biggest problem of both sides. Everyone's saying that they have seen the coin land before the coin has landed. So you could be on either side or the other, and then you're trying to say, oh, well, I know which side the coin is going to land, but it's kind of anybody's best guess. But we already know one side of the coin is never going to land, because the reality already holds the solution. So let's see Joe's argument here. Let's see how he's asking this question. He's basically asking a question in a manner of, it's not very philosophically accurate. You don't necessarily ask questions in that sort of manner.
Evidence for God and Christianity, saying that there's no proof. But in recent years, he had on philosopher of science Stephen Meyer, who gave him the logical and scientific case for God and for Christianity. Let's see if it holds up and see what Joe thinks.
Terrence, we kind of had a...
So I am going to judge both of these sides on what they're proposing as answers and questions. So I'm going to rate it. If they're asking a good question, 1 to 10, so you know how I'm rating these questions now. I've explained what makes a question good or bad. So I'll judge these people on their questions on 1 through 10. And if I give them like a 1, it's basically because, like I've shown you the paradox, you're kind of demanding too much information before you actually know. It's just like demanding that somebody knows if the coin flip is heads or tails, but it's still flipping in the air. So if I say I rate his question a 1, he's basically using that paradox to revolve his argument around. So I'm going to be very honest on both sides, because I judge people kind of individually and not just if they're on one side or the other. So if they ask a bad question, well, I'm going to say that's not a realistic question. That's not really a good question. Same with their answer. If I hear Joe Rogan answer a question and he's basically doing the same thing where he's exploiting the paradox of, you can't really know, well, then I'm going to give him a 1. That, if I give him a 1, it's like he basically the solution is completely over his head. Now remember, we're going to have both sides of the debate going on here on somebody that's saying that they can prove God exists. So I'm going to rate him on, is his question a 1 out of 10? Did he even ask the question in the right manner? Did he even answer the question in the right manner? So let's start rating what this whole debate is about between Joe Rogan and this other guy that supposedly has the answers that proves God exists. Now, of course, you guys know that I'm more biased towards anyone that believes God exists, so I will most likely favor on the side of the believer believing in God, but I still am going to be brutally honest as to whether did he answer the question? Does he actually have the answer? Is he asking the right questions? So I personally don't believe either side is going to be very effective or efficient in, presenting their information or asking their questions, because I believe no matter what side you're really on, it's like everyone is experiencing the same difficulty, the same problem. They aren't really asking the right questions. They're not really looking at everything the right way, and they don't really answer. They don't ask the right questions. They don't answer the right answers. They don't have the right answers because they're they haven't ran across somebody as smart as me that can point out what it is that they're misunderstanding. So thank God I have arrived, everybody. And you can see how difficult this is. And you guys can see why I'm going to be one of the most famous people that God rises up to present this paradox. And I'm going to be the main man because I was the first. I'm like the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last that realize the paradox. And I understand this paradox better than anybody of how you ask the wrong questions in the wrong manner and you answer the questions in the wrong manner, because I'm like a genius when it comes to the coin flip. So that's a whole side story. If anyone follows my live streams, you've heard this story about me mastering the coin flip, which is how I became so good at just knowing what is and is not. So it just so happens I'm basically the solution. I'm basically the answer everyone's always been looking for. But I'm telling you guys, I just was dedicated to my work. I wanted to know the answer, and then I was looking, and then it's like no one really had the answer. So I just took the initiative upon myself to where it's like, well, I would rather try to answer and find these solutions myself, and I would rather ask the question and find the right questions to ask rather than sit here in the middle of this jungle of all these which to me seem like mindless and endless amounts of debates that like make no sense. So I got tired of listening to people argue about things that don't make sense. It's like, why are they debating that? Why are they even asking that question? How do they even get that answer? And after like 10 years of intensive research and so many different random, sides of philosophical research, I finally figured out what the problem is. So I kind of noticed right away that we're dealing with this huge problem where nobody has the answer. And it was driving me crazy because it's like, okay, how hard is it for somebody to present and answer the question, does God exist or does God not exist? So for me, it drove me crazy. Like, how come science doesn't have this answer? So, to that degree, in that sense, yeah, I was kind of looking at everything a little bit like Joe Rogan. So, I'm not saying anybody that is perceiving these questions and answers the wrong way has done anything wrong. It's just that they haven't found the right way to look at it. So let's just get back into rating both sides of the debate here.
A very funny thing that he said about science. He said, science wants you to believe that it's all about measurement and reason if you allow them one miracle. That one miracle is the Big Bang.
Yes.
That all things come from the most preposterous idea ever.
Yeah.
That everything came from nothing in one big miracle.
That's right.
Okay, one thing before I get started, I want to express my opinion on the Big Bang. So, the Big Bang isn't as miraculous as one might try to argue, for the simple fact that anything even exists in the first place. We've already seen that for the simple fact anything and everything exists, you shouldn't be surprised that anything and everything is possible. So that also boils down to God might be possible. We've already seen if anything and everything exists, well then don't be surprised if God exists. But also, it could go both ways. Maybe don't be surprised if God doesn't exist. Because it's a miracle no matter which side you're looking at it. So we've already seen that, things can be eternal. Space, energy. Mostly space and energy, right? So it appears like space was always there, energy was always there, but you've always heard me argue, to me, space is like storage. Space is like memory. So I play a lot of RPG games, so to me, space is kind of like your stash, but you have infinite slots to put your items into. So we already have infinite storage, infinite space, which didn't come from anywhere. It appears to have always just been there. Well, that's a miracle already. Energy appears to have just always been there. Well, there's another miracle. You have all these base foundation miracles that are already self-evident. So how can anybody rule out that God isn't possible to exist when anything and everything existing already is already like the biggest miracle of them all?
Interesting hearing that from Joe because he's not a Christian.
This was Sir Fred Hoyle's objection to the Big Bang. He said nothing comes.
Hold on. What did Joe say?
And Stephen Meyer, who gave him the logical and scientific case for God and for Christianity. Let's see if it holds up and see what Joe thinks.
Terrence McKenna had a very funny thing that he said about science. He said, science wants you to believe that it's all about measurement and reason if you allow them one miracle. That one miracle is the Big Bang.
Yes.
That all things come from the most preposterous idea ever.
Yeah.
That everything came from nothing in one big miracle.
That's right.
It's interesting hearing that from Joe because
So he already stated that everything came from nothing. Well, that already is a very foolish answer to state everything came from nothing, because everything must have come from something. Because if it was actually nothing, you would still get the same result of nothing. So I don't like how he was saying that already, that everything came from nothing. That can't be possible.
He's not a Christian.
This was Sir Fred Hoyle's objection to the Big Bang. He said, nothing comes from nothing. And I simply refuse to believe that the physical universe came from nothing physical. And moreover, he said it smacks of the Genesis account, which he detested. And so he rejected the Big Bang and formulated this steady state model that was later decisively refuted by the discovery of the cosmic background radiation.
Are we making assumptions based on very limited data? It's a lot of data for us, but it seems fairly limited given the scope of not just this universe, but then the concept of multiverses. What are your thoughts of this concept of multiple
I
universes?
love to talk about the
Or
multiverse.
infinite universe.
Now he's just breaking into the next gigantic paradox question. So he's like already wanting all these paradox questions, and he can't even focus on one question at a time. All right, Joe Rogan, you need to focus on one question at a time. You're jumping from one question to the next question to the next question. You know, wait till you even get your answer for the first question before you move into the next big question. That's an entirely different debate. That's an entirely different topic. So my challenge for Joe Rogan is, let's stay on topic. That's beside the point. That's an entirely different question.
I'm glad you raised it. So Hoyle is...
But it's a good question. There's no bad question, really, when it comes to philosophical questioning, because you can kind of ask all sorts of philosophical questions and they really make you think. But why are we jumping into such diversity of questions when we're already trying to focus and solve one big question as it is?
Great astrophysicist. He's thinking about carbon. So he's trying to explain the abundance of carbon in the universe. But then that turns out to be the tip of a deeper iceberg of a whole series of other things in the universe that would have to be just right to make this formation of carbon possible.
This stuff's crazy. If you've never heard the fine-tuning argument for God, even if you're not a Christian or something, this stuff will just get you, man.
Gravity couldn't be too strong, too weak. The electromagnetic force couldn't be too strong or too weak. The ratio between them couldn't be too strong or too weak. Everything fell in this sweet spot, this kind of Goldilocks zone where, and we now call this the phenomenon of fine-tuning, that there are multiple parameters in the universe that fall within these very narrow tolerances, outside of which not only...
So the paradox behind the fine-tuning argument is, well, either everything randomly occurred or not. So you would imagine if God exists that then everything isn't random, and you would imagine if God doesn't exist, well, then everything must be random. So it's either A or B. Either everything randomly just happened or not.
Life would be impossible, but stable.
So that's my argument is the fine-tuning argument points to everything doesn't appear to be random. So if everything doesn't appear to be random, well, that points more towards God must exist, which is why I've proposed that solution, that my theory dictates God must exist. So that's another reason that it points to God must exist. Now, that doesn't prove with absolute certainty that he does, but I'm just saying that it points to the fact that God must exist. Now, people that believe in God, things like that, seeing is believing. That's enough for us to think, wow, there must be a great chance, there must be a large possibility that God is going to exist. See, when we see things like that, that doesn't look random. So the more we see that things aren't random, we're going to be leaning towards more of the side God must exist, as opposed to if everything appears random, we're going to be pointing more towards the side, well, now it looks like God must not exist. So that to me is like a big argument as to why we lean in favor that God must exist. Because if things look absolutely random, well, then I'm going to lean more towards the side that God must not exist. If things don't look random, I'm going to lean more towards the side God must exist.
Galaxies and even basic chemistry would be impossible. And so that is to say, even to get the evolutionary process going, you would have to have all these beautifully finely tuned parameters in place.
This guy cannot overstate how insane this is. I remember when I first learned it, there is literally a percentage of like the chances of our universe forming.
Yeah, it's astronomically through the charts that something like this fine-tuned universe is just completely random. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no possible chance. It's just that if the coin were to land on the side that everything randomly occurred, it would come to us believers in God as a huge surprise. That would surprise me. I would be very surprised.
I think it's called Bayes' theorem. I'm going to check really quick. Okay, yeah. So a mathematician named Roger Penrose, he won the Nobel Prize in Physics. It's 10 to the power of 10.
All right. So we're dealing with a mathematician that actually is boiling down the probability of certain things like the fine-tuning of the universe. So when you ask a mathematician to think that a number like that is random, a mathematician is going to say very improbabilistic. Now, we've already seen that anything is possible, so it could be either side or the other. So we're still not saying it's impossible.
10 to the power of 123. It's a number so big that there's not enough atoms in the universe for the numbers of zeros that the number...
Let me kind of give you an example. These numbers are basically going up so quickly, exponentially fast. And remember, we've only begin finding the mathematical probability of this. And if we find other things to add to this probability itself, you can expect that this number is increasingly just going to keep going up and up and up and up. So this is only touching the tip of the iceberg. We've only began to see that this number is this size. But my theory is that this probability will infinitely go up. So there's always going to be something else that can add to this probability to make it more rare, more improbabilistic, another coin flip, another coin flip, another coin flip defied. So my theory is, although we have only saw certain amounts of the probability, I don't think that this is the absolute probability. I think that the probability skyrockets towards infinity exponentially fast, faster and faster and faster. I just don't think that we've tied every single, cosmological probability to the theory. So we're not even looking at the final probabilities. So to put it into perspective, remember, I'm very good with math. By no means would I consider myself to be a smarter mathematician than someone like him, but I think I am a smarter mathematician in my own way. I have a unique way of perceiving things in a way that no one else has actually ever really perceived it. So in a sense, it's like I am a greater mathematician than him, but at the same time, it's like I'm not. Because it's like I understand things he doesn't understand, but he as well understands things I don't understand. So by no means do I claim to understand everything that he understands, but by no means do I believe that he would understand everything I understand. But I think it goes both ways. If I showed him what I understand, he would understand more. And if he showed me what he understands, I would understand more. So it's not like we both couldn't understand the same thing. So that's all I'm saying. I just so happen to understand things everybody else doesn't seem to understand. So here's an analogy of this paradox. So subconsciously, us believers in God, we kind of are already taking in the entire dilemma of how improbabilistic this is without actually knowing how we're perceiving the numbers, or how, like, we basically kind of subconsciously know the answer without actually knowing the answer, but it's only because we're getting an estimate. So we automatically estimate and perceive how unrealistically unprobabilistic this event is. So someone like me, what I'm saying is, I find it hard to believe that something like this is just randomly sitting out here, because it would be like the equivalent of, well, there's a lot of ways that I could break down this analogy. It's almost like the same improbabilistic probability of winning the lottery every day until the day you die, but yet you don't even play the lottery. Do you see how that is something that almost would make absolutely no sense? Well, how am I the winner of the lottery every single day, but yet I'm not even buying a lottery ticket? So to us, we're basically experiencing that illusion where not everybody sees that illusion for what it actually is. So the fine-tuning of the universe is somewhat like that. Would you really expect that you are going to just win the lottery every day you wake up until the day you die, but you don't even buy a lottery ticket?
Contains. It will blow your mind.
And so Hoyle starts having a rethink about this. And
so all I'm saying is, it's like it makes no sense. How can that be random? See, you would consider, if that were happening, well, this must be something that isn't just random.
He's a staunch atheist, scientific atheist materialist, but he ends up concluding that fine-tuning points to some kind of a
Now, let's take my analogy a little deeper. Now, I did mention it's like, you could say it's like you're not even buying a lottery ticket, right? Because it kind of makes no difference because the probabilities are so improbabilistic. Any improbabilistic probability that you can add on top of it, well, then you might as well make it as improbabilistic as possible because it's like it makes no difference. So it's kind of the same if I say, well, I'm not even buying a lottery ticket and I'm winning the lottery every day I wake up until the day I die. Well, it kind of makes no difference if I say, well, I buy one lottery ticket every day and I just so happen to win the lottery every single day, but I only buy one lottery ticket. See, it makes no difference if you state, well, if I buy one lottery ticket every day and then I just so happen to miraculously win the lottery every single day until the day I die, or it's like it makes no difference if I say I'm not even buying lottery tickets and I'm winning the lottery, or it's like if I say I buy 100 lottery tickets every day and I just so happen to win the lottery every single day that I wake up. So whether you buy 0 lottery tickets, 1 lottery ticket every day, or 100 lottery tickets every day, or 1,000 lottery tickets every day, or 10,000 lottery tickets every day, it's like it doesn't really make much of a difference because it's like the numbers all become the same. They all are converging towards infinity.
fine-tuner. And he's quoted as saying that the best data we have suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry in order to make life possible. And so he moves to this sort.
Exactly. That's a great way to say it. That's what it looks like to somebody who understands probability and mathematics. A true mathematician wouldn't look at that and think that that's random. That's all that we're saying. Now, I can't speak for everybody because there might be a mathematician out there that does perceive it to look random. I can't speak for everybody, and I will not speak for everybody, but for someone like me, where I'm saying I'm one of the greatest mathematicians that will ever exist, and once God rises up and defends my argument and proves my point, it'll be self-evident, like, wow, Brian was one of the greatest mathematicians that the humanity has ever ran across, and nobody even really noticed. So I'm sitting here still trying to be noticed as like one of the greatest mathematicians that solved the paradox of God, and yet I've still yet to be noticed because it's just the way God wanted it to be. I don't need to become famous right away. I don't need to prove my point so strongly to where I'm pointing at everybody like, I'm right, you're wrong, ha ha ha, I'm smarter than you are, because that's just not the type of person that I really am. I don't look down at people in the sense of I made better decisions than you did. I spent better I spent my time more wisely than you. I'm a better person. I am not like that. I'm not going to degrade other people based on their basically preference. If they want to go to the beach and enjoy their time, if they are able to go to the beach and enjoy their time, and they're not doing everything exactly the way I did, I'm not going to look down at them like, well, I spent my time more wisely. It's just so happens, well, that's what you're interested in is what you're interested in. I have no right to say, hey, you shouldn't be interested in doing what you want to do. Same with me. This is what I was interested in spending my time. I liked figuring this sort of thing out. It's just what I liked to do.
Sort of rudimentary theistic position in his philosophy or his worldview. So that's kind of, as Hoyle said, a kind of common sense interpretation.
Now, I gotta rate the way this guy is starting off his debate. I give him a solid 9 out of 10. He's already beginning to start his argument in a good manner. So I already like where he's going with his argument. That's all I'm going to say. I give him a solid 9 out of 10. And if it weren't for the simple fact that I feel like I could explain things better, I would just give him a solid 10 out of 10. But that's just starting off. Now, I'm not saying he isn't going to ask or answer questions in a wrong type of manner, but I like where he's going with it. I feel like this is the type of guy you want to listen to. This is the type of guy you could take his word for it. You could trust him. He understands it. He knows what he's talking about. So I give him a solid 9 out of 10. Almost a perfect 10 out of 10. Joe Rogan, I'm going to give him a solid... Okay, so Joe Rogan, I give him a solid 4 out of 10. Up to maybe a 5 out of 10 so far. The only reason I side with the low side of 4 out of 10 for Joe Rogan is because he's somebody that is very recognizable. And I would look for somebody to be as recognizable as him to be more lenient and state his questions and answers in a better manner. So I just don't feel like he's doing things in the right manner. I think he's just trying to force the making other people's ideas to look bad. Whereas someone like me, I'm not going to try to force it that I want to make you look bad. So I just feel like he's trying to force making other sides of the argument look bad. So to me, that's childish. If you're trying to force somebody to look bad without actually knowing what you're really saying, I give him that low 4. Now, the only reason he was actually even up to a solid 4 is that I am a very understanding person, and I feel that he's just as ignorant about asking some of these sort of questions as anybody else. So it's very typical that somebody doesn't necessarily ask these questions in the right manner. So he's not the only one guilty of kind of not knowing how to ask these questions in the right manner. So I give him a solid 4. If it wasn't for the simple fact that he was so famous, I'd give him a solid 5 because I can completely understand how he could be confused with these sort of philosophical questions, which is why when you're kind of the person sitting on the sideline not doing the work, you're not very philosophical, let somebody else do the job. I feel like he's trying to do the job, but yet he's the one sitting on the sideline. So it's like, which side are you on? Are you going to be the one answering these questions, or are you going to let somebody that actually does this sort of work do their work. So I feel like he's kind of the type of person that isn't going to let other people do their job. Because it's like he's the guy sitting on the sideline, but yet he wants to jump in and just do the job. So which side are you on, Joe Rogan? Are you gonna just sit there on the sideline and let other people that know what they're talking about do their job, or do you just want to sit down and listen to somebody that knows what they're talking about?
When we see other systems that are finely tuned, like a French recipe or an internal combustion engine, what we mean by fine tuning is an ensemble of improbable parameters that work together to accomplish some remarkable outcome. If you see an internal combustion engine, you think it was engineered because it's finely tuned.
I mean, you have to after seeing that. How could you look at the complexity of life and even the processes behind it and like not think that there's some designer that made us? But like Joe said, why does it necessarily have to be this personal guy in the sky, like the Christian God? Why couldn't it be simulation, multiverse? So it'll be interesting to see what he says.
So you guys already know that I side with the believers in God much more because I kind of already know that they're basically right. And I already kind of know the answer. So I highly side with this guy here. But I'm not saying that Joe Rogan hasn't raised good questions. Those are some good questions that he's raising about why does it have to be God? Why couldn't it be a multiverse? He raises a valid point.
So common sense. The contrary argument to that has been the idea of the multiverse. That yes, our universe has this array of jointly improbable parameters that are in that sweet spot. But we just happen to be the lucky one because there's a gabillion other universes out there. And with different combinations of the laws and constants of physics and different initial conditions at the beginning of those universes. So that's superficially an equally plausible explanation to the fine-tuner argument. And a lot of physicists have told me that they regard the two as a wash. You can believe in a fine-tuner, or you could believe in a multiverse.
Exactly. He is correct. It's anybody's kind of best guess. So it's kind of like 50-50. It either is or is not. It's kind of like we just don't really know.
I think the fine-tuner, we'll call it theistic design argument, provides a better overall explanation. And
See, I love the way this guy answers questions. He says, I believe that it makes more sense. So I give him a solid 10 of 10 on the way he just answered that particular question. Because that's how you're supposed to answer the question. It's not like we have absolute certainty that we know that this is the answer. It just seems like it makes the most sense.
here's why. Proponents of the multiverse hypothesis have proposed what they call universe-generating mechanisms. But the idea is that there are mechanisms that would spit out new universes such that we could portray our universe as the lucky winner of a giant cosmic lottery that was produced by a underlying common cause.
But then, like, who caused that cause? Is that just fine-tuned too? Like, I don't understand what you do with that. There's a big problem there.
Okay, fair.
So, before we jump into this, I got to rate his response. When he mentioned, well, who caused that cause, he doesn't really raise a valid argument with it, but I get what he's trying to say. I feel like he just doesn't know how to really state it better, but my perspective on this is the multiverse I've already revealed. So the multiverse theory is very inconclusive for the simple fact that if there were infinite multiverses occurring, and then all of a sudden we get the lucky golden ticket, then that dictates that we hit the lottery that is 1 out of infinite. So if you hit the lottery that's 1 out of infinite, it's like the event can never occur again. So I highly find that to be unreasonable, highly unrealistic. Like, nothing about it would make any fucking sense. That's my own opinion. I don't think the multiverse theory would make any sense at all. That's my theory. That's what I believe. That's my opinion. Let's continue.
Enough. But it turns out that the cosmological models that give us these universe-generating mechanisms imply that the universe-generating mechanisms themselves must be finely tuned in order to generate new universes. So, and that fine-tuning is ultimately unexplained. There's no underlying physics that explains why that fine-tuning. So in order to explain the fine-tuning, you invoke the multiverse. In order to make the multiverse credible, you invoke universe-generating mechanisms. In order to make the universe-generating mechanisms credible or plausible, you have to.
I just thought of a paradox. So, if we're in this finely tuned universe that was created based off infinite multiverses, who's to say that the other multiverses don't play a part in sustaining this actual multiverse that particularly may have spawned off of the multiverse of the multiverse of the multiverse? So if that were to be the case, that would make it even more improbabilistic. So the anthropic principle, or the fine-tuning principle, becomes more improbabilistic. So that would just make it more improbabilistic, because it would almost dictate that every multi-universe had to be exactly the way it was, because, well, if that multiverse wasn't exactly the way it was, well, then the next multiverse wouldn't be exactly the way it was. Then the next multiverse wouldn't be exactly the way it was. And then eventually subsiding to when we reach this multiverse, which became the way it was, would never have became the way it was if everything wouldn't have became the way it was from becoming the way it was from becoming the... So you'll infinitely have this fine-tuning probability that converges towards infinity, infinitely improbabilistic.
To presuppose prior unexplained fine-tuning, and you're right back to where you started.
That's the unfortunate thing about it. Like, as cool as like a multiverse would be.
Exactly. It's like an infinite loop that never ends. It's like an infinite loop where it always becomes more improbabilistic, more improbabilistic, more improbabilistic, infinitely improbabilistic. That doesn't make any sense. Or it seems like that could never make any sense. Now, I'd mention the word "it seems like" that would never make any sense, because maybe there is that possibility that it could. But it seems to me like that must not be the answer. So remember, reality itself holds the answer, so I'm determining that must not be the answer, because I am stating my opinion based on my observation, based on my judgment. That wouldn't make any sense.
And there being like 1,000 of you or a gabillion you in all these different universes, or however it would work. At the end of the day, like, it would still need a creator too, so it's just not really that widely accepted anymore.
When we find fine-tuning, it all...
So, on the guy in the top right, he's kind of getting the idea. That's basically wouldn't make much sense. So, I think he's on the right track. I just don't think that he's able to explain everything as good as I can actually explain it. but I don't expect anybody to be able to explain things as well as I can, because I'm kind of smarter than everybody when it comes to philosophy, because I've kind of spent my entire life becoming a philosopher, and I'm just naturally kind of like the Magnus Carlsen of philosophy. So I think he's got the right idea, and he is on the right track. Completely on the right track. He gets it. He totally gets it. He just probably can't really put it into words. Like how I can put things into words, I can put things into words where most people are really not able to. But the guy that's actually talking to Joe Rogan, he's a little bit like me. I just feel like I'm maybe a few levels above him because I'm a little bit better at putting things into words. So I think it's kind of amazing that there are other people close to my level, but they're not necessarily, they have not exceeded my level. I mean, in my opinion, I just feel like I'm the Magnus Carlsen, the number one of all philosophy. That's, of course, my own opinion. I say I'm the number one of philosophy because I've never found anyone that can explain things really better than I can. But that's my own opinion.
Always results from a mind, and since the multiverse hasn't provided a better explanation for that, I think the conclusion of design or an ultimate fine-tuner stands.
Say that last sentence again.
Okay.
Just the last sentence about the.
Given that
I still give him a 10 of 10 the way he is answering his questions, because he's stating that that's what he thinks. That's what he believes. What you think and what you believe doesn't make you wrong. So that is exactly how you're supposed to say it.
fine-tuning in our experience
Yes.
is always the product of intelligence.
Right.
Think of any system we would describe as finely tuned.
Right.
Then, and given that the multiverse has not provided an explanation for the ultimate fine-tuning, the best explanation remains intelligent design.
And that's his opinion. I agree. It must be the answer.
So he's not wrong. What he's saying makes a ton of sense. Like, there's a ton of things in this universe. Everything we know of that's not random, that's been like man-made or anything, it all has complex designs behind them. But that assumes that our universe is the entire thing. That's true from our observable universe. But what if there is other universes? The only thing is, like, it's all speculation. Like, we can only observe what's observable in our universe. That's the whole domain of science.
When we look at the universe, when we look at God, are we making a mistake by thinking that it's something that created the universe? That maybe the universe itself is this living thing. The universe itself is God.
That's a great question. I think a lot of people ask that. I've asked that in the past as well.
There are
Let's see. He asks, is the universe itself? He's kind of getting on the right track with it. So he's asking a good question. Who do we got on Kick Chat? What the fuck is... I'm live debating philosophical questions that are perplexing. And I'm reviewing this video. And what kind of chess is this? Oh, my channel didn't update on Kick. This is somebody on my Kick Chat. Okay, let's continue.
There are three basic views about this. One is that the universe is itself, the physical universe, is eternal and self-existent. The other view is a more pantheistic view, that there is a kind of God, but it's not an agent or a conscious mind. And then the third view is that there is a transcendent creator beyond the universe who brought the physical universe into existence. The third view is the view that I hold. And I think the scientific evidence is pointing in that direction fairly strongly, in part because we now have evidence suggesting that the universe did in fact have a beginning. The material universe does not look to have been eternal and self-existent. Matter and energy is now a poor candidate to be that eternal self-existent thing. And therefore, I think that the theistic view that a transcendent creator is the thing from which everything else came, without itself being created, is the best place to start our philosophical thinking. It provides the best explanation for what we see.
I think one of the things that really convinced me that the universe is not eternal is, for example, the second law of thermodynamics, which says that in a system, energy entrophies over time, like it breaks down and gets more chaotic. So if the universe was eternal, stars, if they were here forever, they combust over time and explode. So if it was eternal, our universe would have basically run down to nothing and stardust by now. It wouldn't be coherent as it is today.
So as a person of science, what in science?
I don't necessarily agree with what he just said, because all of existence appears to be eternal, because it must be eternal, because something must have always been there. So it's some sort of source of an eternal source.
Leads you to believe that God will create a miracle that...
But I think he's confusing entropy with things breaking down. Like your car breaks down. So just because like everything is breaking down, it doesn't mean that it's not eternal, though. It just would need reconstructed. Basically, simply put, it would just need to be reconstructed. It doesn't mean that it can't be reconstructed.
Changes human beings.
Nothing in science leads me to believe that. I believe in the possibility of miracles, in part because we saw one at the very beginning of the universe. I mean, we have evidence. If God
There's
can bring
lots
the
of
universe into
miracles.
existence from a spatial, temporal, material singularity, then perhaps he can raise someone from the dead or give us life after this life is over. The power is certainly...
There's absolutely that possibility.
Right. If there is a personal God, then miracles are possible, resurrection's possible. It opens up a whole new framework of understanding the entire existence of the world. But notice there was kind of a big jump there from like a abstract creator to the universe, like creator, to like personal God. That was a big jump. Let's see if they cover how that gets explained. I think there is a connection, but we got to see it.
How do you reconcile with the reality that the Bible was written down, at least, by human beings, and that human beings are generally unreliable? At least.
I don't know if you guys have heard the term Captain Obvious. I don't like this sort of way that he's coming at it, because history is history. You know, everyone can only pass down the information they can pass down. So at some point, information is going to be passed down. It's like he's surprised that any information is able to be passed down. So I think that is just absolutely ignorant to conclude, oh, why isn't the Bible 100% true? Why is information being passed down? Like Captain Obvious, why wouldn't information be passed down? And why wouldn't there be some misinformation being passed down also? So why are people getting so confused about history being passed down? Because the longer it gets passed down, the less you're actually really gonna know about it, because it's like the grapevine. The more it gets passed down, you're gonna see fallacy, you're gonna see things that don't make sense. So even passing down information of what you did a year ago is not nearly as in detail with as if you pass that information down one day after you do it. So you can basically remember everything that you did yesterday much better than you did a year ago or 1 year into the future, right? So the longer that you're having to pass down information, the more disconnected it's going to become. So to me, this is like Captain Obvious. Don't be Captain Obvious, bro.
in terms of 100% accuracy?
General answer is that I have a strong avocational interest in the historicity of the Bible as one can test it based on external sources of historical evidence from.
It's like he kind of wants to demand more information than that is actually available. It's like he expects, well, why didn't they just record it with the camcorder, but yet we didn't have a camcorder to record it all? So if we could have just recorded it all with the camcorder, there would be so much more we could investigate. But it just so happens we can't investigate everything. You're just not going to be able to. Just like even what I did yesterday, it's not like you can really investigate everything I did yesterday, because there are so many things that only I witnessed that only I'm going to know that. So how are you going to know things that you can't actually investigate? It would boil down to the investigation will revolve on me being able to remember and present that information as best as I possibly could. And even if I presented all that information of what I did yesterday, there's going to still be all sorts of things that I can't actually remember, because if I was going to accurately tell you everything I did yesterday, I would have to go through everything I did every second of the day that I did yesterday. So at this second I did that. This second I did that. This and every single second. So that's very unrealistic to expect somebody to even reveal every second of everything they did, even just yesterday. And we're even talking even 1 hour. If I wasn't recording everything I did in that 1 hour, there would be so much information that isn't able to be passed on.
Documentary historical sources and archaeological sources. So
I want to know
yeah.
your thought process.
Okay, so my thought process. So crucial event in, for example, the New Testament is the trial and death of Jesus of Nazareth and subsequent resurrection. One key, really striking thing that I've...
Do I believe that Jesus was the Son of God? I know I don't talk about this a lot, but the more that I became aware of the situation and the Illuminati, I believe there is a very large possibility that he most likely might have been and will have been the Son of God. So yeah, I think it's very, very possible. I do think that he most likely probably was, but I have a lot more inside information, so I kind of believe that the fallen angels were doing things they shouldn't have done, and that's why all this is happening.
Discovered in my avocational interest in archaeology is that the 5 or 6 leading figures, most important figures in that trial narrative have all been independently attested by archaeological inscriptions in the last 50 or 60 years.
Okay, this stuff's crazy. If you've never looked at like the archaeological evidence for the Bible, I'd understand that, but it's also insane, and I've only discovered it recently. This is super interesting.
There were some construction workers working in Caesarea Maritima in Israel in 1960-ish, turned over a big slab of rock, and on the back was an inscription from Pontius Pilate listing himself as the governor of Judea with a tribute to Tiberius Caesar. Significant because in the Gospels, the ministry of Jesus is reported to have occurred when Tiberius was the Roman emperor, Pilate was the governor, and we know all about in the trial that the key role that Pilate played. And you have recently in Jerusalem, under the traditional site of the high priest, was discovered a stone ossuary bearing the name of Caiaphas and Caiaphas ben Joseph on two sides of an ornately decorated ossuary. So you have multiple figures from that key event who have been independently attested and established in that time period. Herod Antipas, we know from his coins and his building projects. Jesus himself, Peter, Annas, the other high priest. So you have these multiple lines of external corroboration for this.
So what I propose is, if there are fallen angels doing things they shouldn't do, this is something that you would expect you would see. Maybe they're trying to cover up their tracks. Maybe they're trying to make it so nobody figures out what happened, right? That's what criminals do. They try to cover everything up. How do we know that there isn't one gigantic cover-up going on here?
Really important account. And then you have external sources like Josephus and Tacitus. So there's a weight of external corroborating evidence supporting the historicity of these narratives. And that gives...
Think about it. Criminals, when they're covering up their tracks, they're doing it because they're praying to God nobody finds out. They're like, well, if anybody finds out, I'm going to get in trouble. So why shouldn't we think that maybe this might be the situation?
Gives you, I think, a good reason to take the narrative seriously and to evaluate their other claims. It's, in fact, a level of corroboration that I think is almost unprecedented for any document that old.
That was something that blew my mind, too, when I understood that about the Bible. Like, if you think about manuscript evidence for different documents like Homer's Iliad, Odyssey. I'll actually put up a graph on screen, but the amount of like manuscript evidence and copies of these documents that we have for the Bible is just insane. It's unlike anything else out there, really, as well as the external sources for Jesus. In scholarship, it's often like you have maybe one or two sources for like somebody's life. The life of Jesus has 7. That's pretty remarkable. It's not the only one, but it is really, truly historically remarkable. And the manuscript evidence we have for the Bible literally goes back to like the 1st and 2nd century. I actually have one on hand. This is the John Rylands fragment P52, and this actually has the exchange with Pontius Pilate that they're talking about here. So this character, this piece was from the...
Let me read that. 11 lines of text are lost containing 1834 through 36. The text translates as, the Jews, for us it is not permitted to kill anyone. So that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying what kind of death he was going to die. Enter therefore again into Praetorium Pilate, and summoned Jesus, and said to him, Thou art King of the Jews.
First century with the people on it, Pontius Pilate, and they're talking about the archaeological evidence. So that just goes to show like the reliability of these accounts. Like people aren't just making stuff up. Doesn't automatically make it true, but it does show that it's not just something manufactured later or like a hijacked story. And also, side note, if you actually want one of these, I have a link down below where you can get them. They're really cool, partnered with Manuscript Shop. Let's get back to it.
So that's
corroboration in terms of the narrative of the stories, or corroboration in terms of the
So something I want to say about Joe Rogan here, reading his body language, he does appear to be very interested, and he does appear to be really listening, and I think he's definitely it's kind of sinking into him about how possible this is. So I think that's cool, because I think he's really taking it serious. I think he's becoming a believer, just by the tone of his voice. I think he's definitely considering the possibility, and I think that's cool because, he just seems to be one of the most skeptical people out there, and even he is somewhat, really starting to question maybe this is possible. So I think Joe Rogan is kind of having a great, like, he's kind of seeing things in a different lens, and it's all about how you're looking at it. So Joe Rogan, keep doing your research. I think you're getting there. I think you're starting to figure it out. I think it's I think that we must be right. So Joe Rogan, take my word for it. If I think we must be right, well then we must be we must be right.
Historical figures being real.
Both. In Josephus,
The narrative of the stories being the resurrection of Jesus.
reports of same. You find reports of the there's two different texts of Josephus. One that was likely doctored by medieval Christians that historians rightly
I'm going to drop you the link.
Regard as too affirmative in his expression of belief in Jesus of Nazareth, and one that came to us through the Arabic world, where the Josephus text is much more credible, where he records the basic facts of the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth, including being crucified under Pontius Pilate, and then that there were reports that he had appeared to many after being resurrected. So there's a whole
Right, but there's reports of Bigfoot. You know,
That's crazy. That's a crazy question.
He raises a valid point, but I personally think that that's a very shallow point to raise. But, you know, everyone's entitled to, you know, their own view of logic. So, I mean, he's not wrong. I mean, I just feel like he's not really right, though, either.
From Joe, but it's actually a really good question at the same time.
you know.
I
mean,
love your
human being,
I love your
particularly back then,
Yeah.
where there's no real access to universal information like the internet. There's no real, I mean, there's no libraries. Like, where are you getting all your information from?
right.
I don't think
right,
we're going to
but-
wrestle it. I just want to
but-
know why you.
Right. So I think there are three great scholars who have addressed the question of whether or not the
So to address Joe Rogan's question, he says, "Where are you getting all your information from?" I think that's very shallow because it's like Captain Obvious. Like, it's to our best judgment.
actually four. One is Wolfhart Pannenberg, the great German theologian, historian. One is William Lane Craig. One is N.T. Wright with his magisterial tome, The Resurrection of the Son of God. And the other is Gary Habermas. And there are numerous questions that come up in evaluating all this different type of historical testimony regarding that seminal event, if true, in human history.
Right.
And I've done a deep dive on that stuff, and I'm convinced that the resurrection of Jesus Christ happened as a real event in history.
I mean, he just name dropped some scholars, but I want to see like the evidence that convinced him, for example.
Well, because of the various forms of testimony that we have, the historical evidence we have coming down to us from this day.
But it is your personal belief.
But it is my personal belief, and I would tell you I have reasons to believe that are well considered, and they are reasons not of subjective experience.
Yeah, see, he's very well spoken. He's like me. We like to state things as best as we really can, because we kind of understand. He must know and witness how people are not really understanding what they're saying. We just really kind of understand what we're trying to say. So he's a lot like me.
Or subjective experience alone, but the reasons that are derived from having examined very detailed historical analyses of the relevant data. I do affirm that belief in such an extraordinary event should be well grounded in historical evidence and not something that we just believe because we want it to be true.
It's still not evidence, but it is at least an important point. Many people base their beliefs on subjective feelings and vibes alone. That's how you can kind of end up in a cult or some really bad place. So it's important we ground the reasons we believe in the objective
Go whichever
world.
way the wind blows.
Is it historical evidence or is it historical statements of people who were discussing a thing that may or may not have happened that might have been legend?
Well, much historical evidence is also historical statement. It's testimony,
Sure.
eyewitness or otherwise.
Right, but this is an extraordinary event, right?
Right.
You're talking about a resurrection of a person who died and
Right.
came back and
Right.
was the Son of God. This is a big claim.
Yeah.
I think it's a sticking point for a lot of people, including Joe, and it was for me as well. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Believing that Jesus is God completely changes how you're going to live your life now and how you prepare for the next.
It is a big claim. What historians must do is evaluate the reliability of historical testimony if what's coming is historical.
Something I want to say about Jesus being the Son of God. When I first started researching into it, I was very skeptical as well, and I used to always think, what if that's the devil himself? Because it's like, to me, it just seemed dangerous to just believe that somebody was God. So I just thought, like, that would be something that the devil might try to make look like it was actually him. So I was always kind of afraid, like, oh my, because you know how they're always talking about devil worship and that he might trick you and then you got to be on full alert. To me, I was just kind of terrified, like, oh man, what if that's actually the devil? And then the more that I kind of looked into it, I kind of realized that, well, he doesn't seem to be the devil. He doesn't seem to be doing anything wrong. And then I kind of slowly started to feel safer around the idea that he wasn't, dangerous. He wasn't deceptive. He wasn't trying to steal your soul, because it says, watch out, the devil may try to steal your soul. So I was always on the fence, like, what if he tries to steal your soul? What if he's just trying to get you to accept him, and then what if something happens? Because I always thought, like, something could supernaturally happen, like if you sold your soul to the devil or if you worship the devil. So I was always thinking, well, what if that's like worshiping the devil? So I was always like really careful and skeptical of it. But I highly doubt it's anything like that. I don't think he's the devil. So I think it's very possible he was most likely the Son of God. But that's after I was kind of looking, because when I was doing my research, guys, remember, I was jumping between a lot of different things, reading up on a lot of different things. So I mean, it's not like I was just focusing on Jesus. I mean, I would just dig into small things here and there about it, but I was always looking into like universal science and trying to find the secrets of the galaxy, the universe. And then he just sort of kind of popped up into some of the research on some of the things I was looking at. So it's not like all my research was revolved around, the Bible. I just never really read much of the Bible because I just, I watched the movie, right? The Passion of the Christ. So I get the idea. I was just busy with all sorts of other research, doing my own investigations, that wasn't my main focus, because I felt like there was more answers to be found. So I was looking in all sorts of different, places. So, all my research doesn't really revolve, or, not very much of my research revolves around that very much.
Testimony.
Mm-hmm.
One piece of historical testimony that's always been extremely compelling to me is the testimony of James, who is mentioned in the New Testament as one of the witnesses to whom Jesus appeared after the alleged resurrection event. But he was mentioned as one of his own family members who did not accept his crazy messianic claims, and he did not believe in him. But something changed James's mind. We later find that he becomes the leader of the Jerusalem Christian church, the early Jewish believers in Jesus. But we also then know from Josephus that James was stoned to death, martyred for his witness to the resurrection.
Now, remember, Josephus is one of the Jewish historians who's like writing about these guys as these things are happening. He's not like one of the Christians. It's an external source.
So the first thing that makes me think of is modern day snitching. You know, when you basically testify against somebody, they consider it, oh, you're a snitch, right? So this whole predicament and ordeal with the whole thing of Jesus, it almost seems like somebody's trying to cover something up. And why are they trying to cover it up so much? And why would they be so against somebody basically snitching? Because it sounds to me like they're like that guy that got stoned to death. It's like he was taken and looked at like a snitch. That's what you would expect to happen to a snitch. Oh, don't say anything or, you're going down, right?
There's a kind of very simple argument, but it goes back to one of the early Christian writers, Eusebius, saying that people will lie to get out of trouble. They do it all the time. We see it in our politics. But people don't lie to get into trouble. But in the case of James, we know that he expressed that testimony, and we know it from an external to the Bible source, namely Josephus. I think this is an example of, okay, here's an historical claim. How can we evaluate the reliability of that witness? People will give their lives for an abstract philosophy that they believe to be true. People do not give their lives for a factual claim that they know to be false. That's lying to get into trouble. That's,
true, but we don't know what James' mental state was. We don't know if James was schizophrenic. There's so many variables that could be taken into consideration.
Right, that's a powerful point. Like a lot of the early Christians and people who saw Jesus gave their lives for what they saw, not what like some other dude in like a church said to them, and they just believed it. Because many people have died for things that they got manipulated into or that sort of thing. So it tells us, based on human psychology, that whatever they were saying, they believed that they were sincere, that they really saw this sort of thing. But then you have to wonder, did they go mental, mass hysteria, hallucinations? That's when you get into other theories. Let's see where Joe...
Again, I think Joe brings up a very shallow point. I mean, we run into people every day, and we just consider them to be everyday, ordinary, average people. We don't just sit there and think with everybody we run across, oh, I wonder what their mental state is.
Presses.
It's a question of weighing the preponderance of the evidence and deliberating on it over time. But the one thing I do know is that scientific materialism is failing on multiple fronts. It can't explain the science. It was supposedly based on science, but it's not explaining the cutting-edge scientific discoveries. Dawkins has this wonderful way of framing the issue. He says that the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if at bottom there is no purpose, no design, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, purely undirected material processes, matter in motion, the molecules and the energy, and that's it. But what is striking to me is that the big discoveries that we've made about where the universe came from, about the structure of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the fact that the universe had a beginning, all of these things have turned out to be deeply surprising and unexpected from that perspective of the 19th century scientific materialism that we inherited, that no materialist expected the universe to have a beginning. Every one of them resisted it. Einstein initially, before he adopted a less materialistic worldview, bent over backwards to try to circumvent the conclusion that there had been a Big Bang. The people confronted with the fine-tuning have invented the multiverse concept, but that hasn't actually solved the problem. And in the origin of life problem, they've punted the problem to outer space. So it's actually now the scientific atheism that's getting exotic and invoking extra ad hoc or auxiliary hypotheses to try to save the evidence, where the theistic design view has a sort of parsimony and elegance and simplicity to it as an explanation.
That's one of the insane things about it. Like, for all this time, people thought that perhaps the universe was eternal, going all the way back to the Greeks, or even before that. The idea of there being a beginning used to be the exotic thing. And granted, the Bible got that prediction right. There's not too many scientific things in the Bible. It's not a scientific textbook per se. But it did get that scientific prediction correct. Granted, it's a coin flip, you know, was the universe created or not? And it got it right, 50% chance. But that's interesting. You know, it's led a lot of people to wonder, where did we come from? Because the scientific materialist atheist view has been sort of waning off as we get these new discoveries with the Big Bang and the created universe. So I think that there really is a ton of evidence pointing to there being like some sort of creator in this world. But what they did not fully get at was, how do we get from this like creator to like a personal God who like thinks and feels or knows things? And they didn't entirely explain that here. You would want to dive into the moral argument for God. I actually have a video covering that topic exactly, and I really recommend checking it out. I'm going to put it right here. It goes deeper into, you know, why we believe.
Okay, so now that we saw the video, I'm going to follow up on the very last part of it there about the beginning of the universe. So, which makes more sense? In your own opinion, your best guess, must of everything have been created, or must not of everything been created? What does it look like? All right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to get on Overwatch here in a little bit, probably about 20 minutes. I'm going to go take like a 20-minute break, and I'm going to get on Overwatch. So, yeah, what one of those answers must not even be plausible. You wouldn't even consider one of those answers. So one of those answers, you wouldn't even consider it. Well, which one seems to be most inconsiderable? That the universe must have been created, or the universe must not have been